Dead by Daylight is a survival horror game from Behavior Interactive that was released all the way back in June of 2016. If you're anything like me, maybe you've heard about this game over the years, but never really knew exactly what it was or why it was so popular, and maybe most importantly, why it was still relevant after so many years. I mean, 5 years isn't a crazy amount of time in the grand scheme of things, but in the gaming world, sometimes a game can go from the hottest thing on the market to dead and forgotten in less than even 5 months. So how and why did this game do it when so many others couldn't? Let's get into that. I think before getting to the bigger questions though, we should first start out with the basics. What is Dead by Daylight? At its core, Dead by Daylight is a 1v4 online multiplayer horror survival game where 4 players are playing as the survivors and 1 player is playing as the killer. They face off each other in a showdown to see if the survivors can escape before being killed off one by one. That's the basis of it, but what's really cool about the game is that it's not necessarily the 4 survivors as a whole going up against the killer. Much like in a horror movie, a few of them might die while only 1 survives, and sometimes maybe all of them do. Of course, the game does work better if you do work as a team because that significantly helps your chances of escape, but ultimately every life or death decision is placed on the individual facing that dilemma at the time. And maybe they won't always make the right choice. But beyond a 1v4 showdown, the real objective of the game, at least on the survivor side, is to turn on generators. Even with the help of some friends, the generators power up at a pretty slow pace and also offer up the challenge of the skill checks. This is essentially one of the defining gameplay mechanics of the game, and it's not the easiest thing to do. So what happens is that at random points while you're powering up a generator or healing a teammate, and also while you're on the hook, there will be these skill checks that pop up that require you to press the spacebar at the right time for either a good skill check, or if you're feeling confident, a great skill check that is a much more difficult thing to accomplish. And while that might look or sound simple enough, it's really that great skill check that can throw things off, because if you mess up even in the slightest way, the generator's gonna explode and also give away your location to the killer. And ultimately, and I feel like this usually comes as a bit of a surprise for people, that's really all you do as a survivor. But obviously, as you know, there's a killer on the loose as well, so it's not just as simple as turning on 5 generators and opening the gate to your freedom. I'm sure that's the case sometimes with a killer that's not quite up to speed with things, but games can get ugly really quick if the killer does know what they're doing. And also if you make even the smallest of mistakes while trying to avoid catching their attention. And there's quite a bit revolving around what it takes to get around the killer as well, but let's jump over to the killer's perspective now to go over all of that. I think the gameplay as the killer deserves its own section of the video here, because while it might be the side of the game that is played the least for a lot of people, it's really what drives everything in the game. As with the best horror movies, and really any movie in general, it's only ever as good as the villain is. So let's start out with the core stuff for the killer. The biggest difference that you'll notice that changes things up is that it goes from the third-person perspective of the survivor to the first-person perspective of the killer. And that's a pretty big difference. And if there's a setting to change that, by the way, I haven't found it, so maybe you still can do third-person, but I'm not entirely sure. But after you get past that, you then realize that the task at hand for you as the killer is even more difficult than as the survivor, at least in my opinion. It might always feel like the killer has the advantage, and they definitely have some upper hands for certain things, but you still have the challenge of needing to kill 4 different people before they have the chance to escape, and this is why that isn't easy. In order for a survivor to die, they need to be placed on a hook 3 different times, in some cases only 2, or they have to bleed out. Sometimes that's really easy to do, but other times it's pretty much impossible. Again, much like with good killers, there are really good survivors, and if they know their way around some of these maps and how to run around you or use the pallets and the windows and all the different kinds of ways of getting away, it'll just make you feel like a fool chasing after these annoying kids, and it'll actually make you feel a little sympathy for them even though you're the one that's getting fooled by them. But if you are able to hit the survivor with whatever weapon of choice the killer that you're using has, then you have to hit them a second time for them to fall down, and then you can pick them up and place them on the hook. And that's pretty much the game at its base level. There will be some that prefer playing as survivor, and I'm sure there's going to be some that prefer playing as the killer, and everyone is pretty much out for themselves in a way. But of course, there is the option of trying to help out your fellow survivors if you want, given that you even have the opportunity to, and that's where all these different things come into play. But okay, I think I said mostly everything necessary for what this game is like, and ultimately what Dead by Daylight is, but let's get into a little bit of the more advanced stuff like the perks and all the different characters that you can choose, because I think that's really been the secret sauce for why this game has prevailed over all of this time. So as for the actual game, the perks and items you get for your loadouts are way more important in the game-to-game perspective, and I'll get into a bit of that in a bit, but we have to talk about the importance of pop culture with this game first, because while I do think that the game is fun, I'm actually not sure if it's good enough on its own to stand out without all the additions of pop culture characters and maps that it has. It is still fun to go out there against the Trapper or the Huntress and hear the humming as she gets closer to you and terrorizes your life, but it's also just a bit cooler to go against Ghostface and Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger, and also to be running around in Hawkins' lab and going into the Upside Down or the setting of Halloween that I can't remember the name of right now. That's pretty much every horror fan's dream, and to be able to also play as those killers is awesome too. And sure, you know, that's all additional stuff that you have to buy on the side, side, but they're popular enough now that even if you're just playing as the survivor, you're likely to go against one of them or more, and getting to run away from Jigsaw or getting caught in one of his traps is kind of the coolest thing ever. You can't really get that in any other game, and so it kind of forces you into accepting this odd gameplay routine of turning on these weirdly placed generators all over the map and getting placed on these strange hooks, and the fact that the strongest weapon you have to get away from a savage killer is to throw down a wooden pallet that they have to kick and break before they can continue chasing after you. And okay, now let's get into a few of those perks and the loadouts just to get a feel for them if you haven't played this game before, because they are pretty important. So when you play the game, you're not only trying to escape or kill, you're also earning blood points. And you can then use those blood points in the blood web in between matches to unlock different perks and items, and also to level up that specific character that you were playing as. And as you do this, you get more and more valuable perks, and you continue to level up your character until you have a much bigger advantage over the killer, and vice versa, than if you were using the character at their base level with nothing. Also, you can take in an item with you like a toolbox that helps you fix generators faster for a limited amount of time, and maybe a med kit, and there are different add-ons for those items as well that can help them even more. And finally, there's an offering that you can use every match that will help you out in some sort of way, like maybe, you know, giving a higher percentage of there being a hatch that you can escape from and things like that. I can't speak to how that worked for the killer as much because I haven't played as killer too often, but they also have perks that can help them out a lot, and I believe they also can use totems and hexes which work against the survivors, and again, that's where things start to get pretty advanced, and you know you're playing with some higher level players when that's happening. But I think I've talked enough about all the inner workings of this game, so let's talk a little bit about its legacy now, and maybe the biggest question of all. I don't necessarily know how many people are still asking this, but I think it's an important question to bring up. To get my answer out of the way, I'm gonna say yes. I think Dead by Daylight is a super weird game, but it is a good game. It has so many things that you would think would work against it, and somehow it all just works. It's a pretty dumb premise with the whole fixing generators thing, and the only real skill-based gameplay for you to do as Survivor is to do those skill checks in an almost rhythm game type of style. And running away from the killers is pretty standard stuff, and a big way to evade the killer is to run around in circles or hoping that they miss or just perfectly throwing down a pallet. It's just a bizarre series of things to do in a game. The loading times also aren't great, and there are plenty of times when a killer will be AFK or they'll rage quit when things don't go their way, and it's a bit janky and dumb things can happen, and it can just devolve into utter chaos and madness, and yet it still just all works. It's not ever going to be considered one of the greatest games of all time, but I think it's made a big enough name for itself that will span over 2 different decades now and be remembered as one of the seminal horror games of our time, and it will absolutely have a lasting legacy because of that. Even now, 5 years into it, they're still getting new characters and still staying pretty relevant on Twitch, which is a huge accomplishment for a game like this. I do think the game's pretty silly, and a lot of people might not enjoy it at all, but when you're the only real competitor in your niche and market, well, you're still the one on top. And unless another game comes out that can compete with them in this horror pop culture part of the marketplace that they've cut out for themselves, it's likely that the game won't be going anywhere anytime soon. So thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I wanted to go a little more in depth for this one because for a game that's been going on for as long as this one has, I think it deserves a little bit more than the standard fair review. I really have enjoyed playing this game, and I kind of feel like it's barely getting its teeth into me, so I'll probably be playing for a good while. I didn't even mention it before, but it's just so fun to play with friends too, and there's not enough games like that out there. Also, one last quick thing I want to mention, and this isn't something I'll promote too often, but I've started to stream on Twitch, and it's a fairly new thing, and it's been a lot of fun, and my first stream this summer was actually playing Dead by Daylight, and I've really been enjoying it. And don't worry, you know, my main focus is definitely still making videos for YouTube, and I'm actually starting to stream on Twitch because I think it's going to help me out to make more YouTube videos, so that only makes it that much more exciting. But yeah, you know, if you want to check it out, I'll put a link right here, but you can search up the name, you know, Joey Anthology. I pretty much use that everywhere, and yeah, you know, hopefully you'll want to hop over there one of these days and check it out, but no problem if you don't want to. So yeah, you know, I think that's it for this video. This is going to be a slightly longer one, and I'm actually on stream right now putting this whole thing together, so that's a very exciting and terrifying thing in its own right. But again, thank you all just so much for watching this. It really does mean a lot to me. I hope you're all doing well out there. I hope you're having a great day, and until the next one, take care everybody.